Um, I would love to introduce Lawrence, but I'm actually going to give it back to you because I haven't met Lawrence in person yet. And so please, will you introduce our racial and ethnic disparities coordinator, and then Lawrence can give us an update.
Oh, it's my pleasure. So Lawrence White, and he will speak in a moment, is our new racial and ethnic disparities coordinator, and he's absolutely fantastic. And I'll let him speak about his background and the future of racial and ethnic disparity reduction for YDD as he sees it, and as the YDD supports it, as well as YDC, of course. But I just must say, Lawrence went to the OJJDP training in December while he was still technically working for another agency. So, but he was so willing to go with us and receive the training. So he's actually better trained than most racial and ethnic disparities coordinators I know. At least that was like a training before he started the job, which was fantastic. And he's already made quite a progress because I was at the conference call with Coalition for Juvenile Justice, and he made quite an impression on the Racial and Ethnic Disparities Committee there. All they could talk about was what a wonderful addition Lawrence is to the group. So Lawrence, why don't you, if that's okay, why don't you say a few words about your background and today going forward? But at any rate, whatever he's gonna say, it's been a delight working with him.
Well, thank you, Anya, for those wonderful words. Hello, everyone. My name is Lawrence White. I am the new racial and ethnic disparity coordinator with YDD, and so glad to be here and to assume this role. I come from way of Washington State. I worked for the Pierce County Sheriff's Department there for over 2 decades. I was a manager up there with their detention facilities. And prior to that, I was in the military, but I also come from New Jersey. I was raised in a pretty difficult environment, but I had very good support in my home and some really great teachers as well. So it deterred me from finding myself in situations that were probably uncomfortable for juveniles. So, or young people, I'm sorry. I have a passion to help young people stay away from those areas with an emphasis on racial and ethnic disparities as well. Coming from that environment, there was a lot of disparities in the school systems as well as the juvenile justice systems as well. So I bring work experience, I bring life experience, also bring education. I hold the bachelor's degree in criminal justice and looking into, as we speak, really furthering that education with some of the colleges in this area with a master's degree in justice studies and or public policy. So I'm really excited to bring my life experience to this role and try to really promote the need for awareness in racial and ethnic disparity in our program and throughout our state. I believe Oregon's a beautiful state. Really, really beautiful people in it. And together, I think from a collaborative standpoint and a communication standpoint, I would like to provide any technical assistance I can to the programs that we have, as well as the stakeholders that are involved in this work, just to do the best I can, again, to just be collaborative and communicative and really, educate everyone on some of the disparities that do exist and how we can mitigate and even eliminate some of those things. So thank you for having me. And I'll pass it back to Anya. Thank you.
Thank you, Lawrence. Does anybody have any questions, Molly? Any follow-up questions to Lawrence before we move on? Not hearing any. I just would add to what Lawrence has shared. So normally, right now, we would be in applying for the next funding cycle with the OJJDP, which means some data reporting will be due. But things have changed over the last few years with the OJJDP, so we don't know at this point when we will need to submit RAD data. However, usually we receive the information from Oregon News Authority, their Jay just help me here. Is it steering committee or is it executive committee for the Juvenile Justice Information System? For
Steering committee.
The steering committee. So usually by the end of March, we would be receiving previous calendar year data. And based on that information, we'll be compiling using new format that the feds have provided for us, looking at disparities during the previous year, which will be 22. We don't have that information yet, so we're still working off what we know was happening in 21. But that's maybe at the, if not in March, but in April, we will have some information. And now I think, Lindsay, do you want to talk a little bit about the compliance monitoring, where we are at? Because I know you've been collecting data as for a whole schedule.
Yes, started my data collection in October for the secure facilities for the period for FY22, if they had any juveniles held securely, how long and why, make sure there's no violations, so that hopefully sometime this month, OJJDP will open up their reporting and I can get everything reported and squared away for the year. Just before this meeting, I was going through the Oregon Youth Authority detention data that I've received. I need to extract the juveniles, the runaway juveniles from out of state and send that to ICJ to make sure there's no violations there. So that's what I'm currently working on. Also, it is every other year we do our surveys to the non-secure facilities to make sure that they're still not secure and so that they don't need a report or have the 3-year inspections. So I'm doing that this year as well. It's a lot busier, it seems like, when I'm doing both secure and non-secure facilities at the same time, but that's good. I'm getting to meet new people too. So, because I didn't talk to these guys last year.
So, does everyone know the role of the compliance monitoring? I want to make sure that many of us know that. And so, but I want to ask the committee members if they are aware of what our responsibility is in the OJDDP compliance monitoring. I'm seeing some shaking of some heads. Lindsay, do you want to do like a 100,000 foot or 50,000 foot layover of what we're talking about?
Sure, I'll do my best. So the OJJDP has like juveniles can't be within sight and sound of adults. They can't be in a secure setting longer than 6 hours without accruing violations. Once every 3 years, I need to go into the secure facilities, look at their detention logs, and that's also what I get once a year that I'm working on now. But I look at them when I go to the site visits, just kind of walk around. What do you do with your status offenders? Because status offenders aren't supposed to be in a secure setting at all. And I mean, I'm officially in role as of April. So here.
You're doing great. Anya can probably pick it up if you want her to, Lindsay.
Yeah, there's a new requirement coming out with the 11B, which we're still waiting from OJJ to get more data on that. But yeah, Anya has been doing this a lot longer than me, and she's a great guide for me.
I'll appreciate Lindsay. This thing with the JDP Act, it was reauthorized in 2018, and there are some new provisions that were introduced during that time. However, they did not take effect until 21. So now we're dealing with the new requirements and how to monitor them, and that's what Lindsay was talking about. And now it involves additional partners, courts in our case. So we had a really good meeting with the Judicial Department last week, and they're totally on board, and they will be helping us messaging the judges and the courts, and So it's just like as Lindsay said, that added new layers to the responsibilities related to compliance monitoring. But the funny thing is the act is up for reauthorization again, likely this year. So there will be more changes to come.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so
Life.
yeah, and so I think I'm just kind of Lindsay and Anya are talking about is if we're in compliance as a state on the 6 core areas, then we're able to receive all of our formula grants to the state of Oregon. If we find that we're out of compliance, we have to complete a plan and submit it to OJJDP. And if they accept the plan, I think we have a little bit of grace, but then at some point there's a reduction if we're not able to come into compliance. And I'm kind of going over this a little tediously because there's actually a legislative concept that could put us back at risk of being out of compliance. And I just want everyone to really be aware of that. So Lindsay, when you think about it, detention as being where compliance occurs, but it's actually police departments, sheriff's offices, county jails, juvenile detention facilities, and a host of other kind of combos across the state. And so Lindsay has kind of a large job to develop relationships with all of the secure jails and detention facilities, as well as non-secure office buildings, sheriff's office, police departments. So that's kind of why I was being a little bit tedious on what that is for everybody to understand. Am I spot on, Anya?
You absolutely are.
And so we were able to advocate at the Hill, and it was reauthorized, but it's up again for reauthorization again this year. And it seems like about every couple of years, there's little changes to either our plan that we submit to the federal government or the data that they are asking for. And Yeoman's work, Lindsay and Anya basically had to rewrite our plan this past year because after we had submitted our plan, they changed the rules on us. And so they were able to just huge thank you to all of the long nights and early mornings to get that done. So if anybody wants to read it, it is good evening reading. So you're more than welcome to ask it from Anya and Lindsay, but it's relatively technical in what they're specifically asking for. But for everyone to know, it really is the key core areas that we need to monitor, which are sight and sound, status offenders, isolation, and I don't know all of them off the top of my head right now. But anyway, I know there's 6 of them. Okay. Well, thanks, Bo. I'm sure Lindsay or Joy or Anya, okay, have connected to that. Might be on the website. Yeah, I think it's on the website. The formula grants. Do you want to lead into that, Anya?
Right, sure. Well, actually, this whole discussion, and thank you, Molly, for asking those additional questions and giving clarifications. That brings us to the next item on the agenda. So, Joy, if you don't mind putting that funding priorities on the screen. So while Joy is doing that, there are a couple of documents that Molly was referencing. One is the state 3-year plan, which has been posted on our website. So if you go on Youth Development Division, Youth Development Council general website, you will see it under Juvenile Justice Federal Funds. And the federal funding goes through a 3-year cycles. So every 3-year time period, state designated agency and the state advisory group have to come up with a plan for the next 3 years of federal funding based on multiple factors. Large one being juvenile crime analysis, which was conducted prior to the development of the plan, and you should also be able to find it on our website. So those are the kind of things, and they go into the application for the federal funds. Now, Molly was absolutely 100% correct when she said that the amount of funding, at least the percentage of funding, is dependent on whether the state is in compliance with the federal law. For each non-compliance with each of the core factors, core requirements, we will lose 20% of the funding. Now, the total amount is never known until the Congress appropriates things. We just know what percentage we're eligible for. So fortunately, we're currently eligible for 100% of our funding for fiscal year 21, and we'll get to the 22 in a moment. Now, as Martha said, we were held, the funding for 21 was held from each state for over a year. That's why we're kind of starting a little behind the schedule, and we're looking at 21 and 22. So just recently we received the 21 award, but sadly, just the way that JAS grant system works, that's the federal financial system that we have to use. For whatever reason, our budget has not been cleared. So right now we still don't have the money, and I know Brian is here, but Brian, don't panic. We will get the money. We're working with the feds. They don't know themselves again what's happening with the system. But once we get the funds, we know how much money we have. So for 21, we will have, I'll tell you, it's $615,971. Out of that funding, we are allowed to, as a state, we're allowed to keep we have to pass through 66.66% of the whatever total allocation is. Out of that percentage, we need to make sure that 75%, no less, is allocated to the type of programs that have been on the list in the act itself. So that kind of narrows the scope of what we can fund and how much. So in the plan that we had submitted, and then the budget that is still kind of pending final, it's not even approval by the feds, they approved it, it's in the system. There's some kind of glitch that is not happening. So our 3-year plan priorities were based on the priorities of the council and the agency. So I'm not going to read them to you, you can see. So when you see a goal, like system alignment transformation, those were the goals that we took from the agency and council's strategic plan. So how do we support the goals of the council with the federal funding? So you just can adjust the objective to that, and the objective is to initiate and drive juvenile justice system change through agency partnerships. And I'm sorry, I cannot really see it. This is too small on the screen, but you can read it, I hope. The area that kind of was in the federal funding that fit with it would be delinquency prevention. So that's one type of funding that will be available, and we'll get to the RFA process in a moment. So the second one was goal is building youth voice and resilience. And again, how do we support that goal through actions and strategies for the council? So it seems that within the federal areas, the community-based programs and services were the type of activities that would support youth voice and resilience. And the third one for the council and the agency is community capacity and justice. So within that, it felt that alternatives to detention and placement, basically keeping kids outside of the juvenile justice system, was a reasonable area. So with that, Lawrence and I started working on the conceptually on the next RFA cycle for these funding areas. So Lawrence will be studying a system that I see some of the grantees are here, like the current grantees that we have for the feds. But I also believe that some of you are getting other funding from the YDC. So if you've been using SM Apply in the past for other youth development grants, this is the system that we're transitioning to for the federal funding as well. So the RFA is in the process. Now, what we don't know at this point, and we're consulting with you, is basically what to do with fiscal year 22 funding, because the program areas will be identical to these, because remember, it's a 22 will be second year of this 3-year plan, right? So amounts will be different. However, not by much, because the difference in the total award that the state is receiving is $3,000. So it will be approximately the same or close to. So question is, and I don't know if we need like a distinctive answer right now, but something that we need to think about and probably have an answer by March. Do we put all the money out, both 21 and 22 at the same time for grants periods for a year? Or are we investing in a long-term programming? So the first option is to put all the money, so basically double approximately what you see here, and say this is how much money is available for a grant period, say October 1, 2023 through September 30th, 2024, because usually it's a year period, 12 months. And we're trying to move the funding period in alignment with the federal fiscal year, because that's how we have to report, and that's how the money is coming in the state. So are we putting all the monies, say double what we have here, 21 and 22, at the same time for potentially like twice as many projects to be funded? Or are we putting 21 for an RFA with the expectation that successful applicants and successful projects will be eligible for second year funding, okay, based on grantee performance, obviously. But at this point, we'll already know that the 22 funding will be available, because since we got a delay in 21, we can, you know what I mean? Because usually with the federal funds, you never know if you're going to get how it's kind of like box of candy, chocolates, right? You never know what you're going to get. Are we going to be in compliance? Is the Congress going to appropriate larger amounts or smaller amounts? What the percentage will the state receive? And, you know, so it's never a guarantee. So right now, I cannot tell you that we will, not only how much money we'll get in 23, how much we will be eligible for. So it's never a guaranteed sort of thing. But now we could potentially say there is money for the second year. So with that, I will probably be quiet and listen to the opinion of the council.
Yeah, so I would ask, I'm going to ask the committee members, did everybody kind of understand what Anya was explaining? It's unique because in Oregon, we do biennial budgets. So we do 2-year budget from a state budgeting process. At the federal level, they do annual budgets. And so it's an annual process. So from the state level, it's only a year at a time that it is approved. And so I think the question that I'm interested in hearing from everyone around is, we have the opportunity right now to look at it as a 2-year funding opportunity rather than a 1-year funding opportunity. And I don't know if I have colleagues on the call that have received these grants in the past. But what I will share from colleagues that I have known who have received them in the past, a 1-year grant is a very difficult grant to manage because it's so short term. By the time you get through and contracting, it feels like if we have that opportunity, that might be a great opportunity. But I'm gonna hold it there, and committee members, Christina, Sam, you guys have been around a little while. What would you think? Yeah, Sam.
Can I share my screen, Anya? I'm gonna try and share my screen.
Yeah, sure.
Sam, I'm gonna make you co-host so you can share your
Okay.
screen as well.
Okay. So, Molly is spot on. Molly is spot on. Like, what she's saying is true. Thing about, oh, how do I lower my hand? I'm gonna try to share, about the 2-year grants and so forth. But I'm gonna, and then, so this is how I do my contracts. Here, I give them like year 1, year 2, but what I do is I supplement year 1 after the previous year has ended. So what I do is I get the federal funds that were not spent the previous year, and I reallocate it to people that will spend it and do want it. So Anya, I don't know if you guys have this ability, like this is my 2-year contract, is year 1, year 2, but year 1 has more money that was from the previous years, like 2021 unspent. So, yeah, so like, that's how I kind of do it. Like, yeah, and I lost my button to stop, sharing. Sorry. Yeah, like if you guys, oh, there it is. Like, yeah, that would be my recommendation. My recommendation would be kind of like how the state system does biennial budgets, but allocate per year. And if there's some people that didn't spend their year in year 1, reallocate it in year 2 to people that will spend it. And that way, have mechanisms in place where, you can do that. That'd be my recommendation.
Okay. So I think what we'll do today is, yeah, Christina, take recommendations, and then Anya, you guys can come, Anya and Brian come back with a recommendation, but go ahead, Christina.
I just wanted to say I agree with what Sam said and what you said before him, Molly. I think that for some of the organizations, the inefficiency or the efficiency that would be gained by doing it as a 2-year cycle instead of a 1-year, there's a lot to be said for that. I'd really rather see folks that are applying to use this funding to help young people and families in the community get to spend their time and energy doing that, and not have to spend all of the amount of time that it takes to apply, administer, you've already covered that. So I 100% agree with trying to go with a 2-year plan. Plus, I think it gives, if you're contracting out with community-based providers, which a lot of us do, different counties, it gives a little more stability to those organizations to know that, hey, this job isn't going to end in a year. If we do a good job, it's likely going to, our program's going to continue, or our ability to offer this service. So I think that's really, really important. We're coming out of 3 years of real instability for providers, and especially our nonprofit colleagues. So anything we can do to kind of move in a more stable, we can count on it kind of direction, I think is really important.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also just really want to say we need to think about, as YDC members and Juvenile Justice Committee members, is our staff at YDC. And there's the grant process is heavy. It's administrative heavy for our YDC and YDD staff. Anya, I am curious, and Brian, please feel free to weigh in on this as well. There's a couple different things happening at the state level with juvenile justice. The Council of State Governments work with the Oregon government, as well as some other pieces. Anya, is there a rush to get these dollars set aside or designated through what our priorities were, or do we have a little bit of time to think about that process and look at our priorities and how to frame it within each of our priorities?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Because fiscal year 21 grant is already getting old.
Yes,
Because you see, they withheld the funds, but they didn't change the project period. So if we wait for too long, we might run out of time to expand the federal funding. So that's one.
Yep.
Two, if knowing our procurement processes, if we don't get the RFA out of the door sometime in spring, we will not be able to process the applications and get the grant agreements ready for people to start their processes in October. Because there are some federal grantees right now with us, Fallon, I just saw you, but I know other people are here too. It took us almost 9 months to get the current grant agreements out of the door. So the sooner, all of it to say, the sooner we get this ball rolling, the better. However, we could have a conversation in March at the March Juvenile Justice Committee meeting. Now with having a bit of more information, how to make the planning priorities a little more specific, basically what to put into RFA. What we may not change is the funding areas. So it still has to be delinquency prevention. It still has to be alternative to placement. You know what I mean? But we can change the language, what actually goes into request for applications. So basically, we'll include there's how your project aims to reduce disparities in the programs that you're proposing to fund, how it's going to align with certain things. So there are some additional parameters that we can include within the larger scope. I don't know if I answered your question and made it even more.
No, actually you outlined it perfectly. So in March, so the request to the committee members is to look online and look at what our priorities are. And in March, we should be able to have a pretty good conversation about the RFA. Because you're right, procurement is going to get slammed kind of looking at July 1 with a whole new, because we're in a new biennium. And so if we could get this kind of out the door and kind of looking at what that's going to look like before then, we would be ahead of the game for not only us, but also for our partners and our grantees, because there's going to be lots of grants here. Procurement.
Right, so we have to kind of be mindful of that process as well.
Okay.
But if I,
can I weigh in?
of course,
And I think we can internally also kind of probably get ourselves organized around sort of what we want to do. If we wait until mid-March, if we're going to have another, there'll obviously be another committee meeting, which makes sense, and we have a full council meeting in early March. You know, to Molly's point, we are going to be in the mid ODE's procurement, that they have thousands of things happening, right? Long story short, and Anya, you and I can probably talk about some of this more offline. Like, we actually need, it'd be better if we got an RFA developed and ready by mid-March versus
Late March.
back together.
Yep.
And having a conversation. That is to say, we could, I don't know when the next committee meeting is, but it would behoove us to actually say, hey, here's what we've come up with. We'd want your input, your questions. We have to be somewhat careful. I mean, I guess the committee could discuss, but there are some probably rules we want to be aware of about making that document too public before we actually launch it. But long story short, there's just a serious crunch in the spring, and we need to get ahead of it and have a mid-March timeframe already. I already know it from procurement.
March 6th is our next meeting, Brian. So
Okay.
it's so that might fit in with exactly what you're saying. And probably what the committee needs to look at is the big picture to make sure we're aligning with our, remember I set our goals a couple years ago and submitted our application to the federal government. So I think it would stay and align with what those are. The technical language of the RFA, I think we can stay out of.
Yeah, I agree.
Anya, does that seem reasonable to you?
It does, and I really appreciate that.
Okay. So we'll put a note that when we, as that's developed, but definitely before the meeting next month, that will be in your packet of attachments to be able to take a look at. Again, not the detailed language of the RFA. That's really what the staff are to do, but the big picture.
That sounds reasonable.
Adrian or Christina or Sam or anybody? Ralphie, anybody? Does that seem reasonable? Thumbs up?
Thumbs up.
Okay. Love it.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
really appreciate it because this is a unique, sometimes unfortunate things lead to fortunate development. Since we were held back for a year of the funding, now we have 2 years that we can allocate at the same time, which is not, or rather not allocate, but be comfortable knowing that we have the funds.
And so I am just going to take a moment to make my own kind of editorial on that. Is I think that the second time around the process was much better, and the federal guidelines for are more in line with what this committee and the YDC has focused on over the last few years. Some of the 2021 initial was a little bit different than what we had aligned for us. So I think this fits better in what we as a committee have set as our priorities. So I appreciate that. Okay. So the next on the agenda is the 2023 legislative session. And Brian, I'm going to let you lead off with anything that you might want to bring to the Juvenile Justice Committee before I lead off.
Well, I guess I can say, yeah, the legislative session has kicked off. We've had education where we just kind of presented an overview of the agency. I got an email late last week to prepare for a meeting, an upcoming meeting later this month, the 21st, I think, to share with the House Committee on Ways and Means, which is the committee to which we go to present our budget. So we're going to first go to them with just kind of an agency overview. When I was at the Education Committee meeting, I had 5 minutes. Yeah, 5 long minutes to present on the agency. We'll see if I get 5 minutes or more in front of Ways and Means. I'm not complaining. It is what it is. We'll give them a PowerPoint, and it'll probably be longer, and they can dive into all sorts of weeds if they want. But we'll do our whatever time we get. We'll make the best of. And also just beginning to have some good conversations, and Molly or Christina or others may speak to this. Representative Kropp has organized a couple of kind of work sessions around a couple of juvenile justice related bills, and I've been able to attend those along with Anya and others, just to kind of provide both perspective and just listen and learn. And also I'm aware, because I was at the last week, I was at the governor's Black History Month proclamation. I did see Senator Dembro, who is interested in checking in around a truancy bill that is being introduced. And then also I saw Representative Bynum, who is on the House Committee on the Judiciary, and that was the committee that Rep. Kropp and others from Christine Kirk from OIA and others presented to. I listened in on that meeting. So that's the quick sort of update on like committees and meetings and conversations that are happening. We're tracking a bunch of other bills. some of which are, I think, you know, the juvenile justice bills, which I imagine will come up here in a second, and you know, providing some analysis when we can, and that's what I know.
That's great. So the February 21st is the presentation for Ways and Means. Is it for Joint Ways and Means?
I think I'll double check if it's joint Ways and Means. Hold on, I'll let you know.
Okay. And in the past, we've been able to participate. Somebody has been able to participate. Are they doing just, do you get to have supporters at the table with you, or
the way, at least it's off, this is sort of a, hey, provide an overview of the agency. This isn't our actual formal budget presentation.
okay. So
So this
when
is,
that is?
yeah, the 21st.
No, when do you know when your formal budget presentation?
Oh, that date, sorry, not yet.
Okay. OIA just got theirs, so I was just curious if you had got yours.
Yeah, I haven't heard yet. We usually end up toward the end of the session, so.
Yeah. Just starting to roll out. I think that's
Yeah,
just happening. Okay. So
I'll check.
That's okay. I have a couple that I just wanted to bring up. Super appreciate Brian and Anya participating on several different committees that have been talking about juvenile justice. And since this is the Juvenile Justice Subcommittee for the Youth Development Council, I felt like it was just appropriate to give you guys at least a heads up what's going on out there, and maybe have a little bit of discussion around a couple of them. And the first is it's House Bill 2320. And it is out of Representative Croft's committee. And it really is a simple bill in language, but it's developing a juvenile justice advisory commission within the Oregon Criminal Justice Commission. And I guess I just wanted to maybe allay some fears that is not a replacement for our juvenile justice subcommittee through the Youth Development Council and out of the Youth Development Division. It has a bit of a different perspective. And so I just wanted to talk about that and share that with this group ahead of time. So if you heard about it, you weren't feeling like something had happened and we were getting replaced. The topic is big enough and the system is large enough that it's important, I think, to have a research arm. And the Youth Development Division through ODE has not been ever funded to be a research arm. And so I just wanted to touch base and answer any questions, or have Brian answer any questions on if there was any like fears that we were all getting terminated from our positions. Okay, Christina, and I'm actually going to invite Tori to weigh in if you want to, either one, on kind of that conversation. And Tori Lynn, Juvenile Director of Lynn County, is also the chair of the Juvenile Directors Legislative Committee. So anything to add for this group around 2320?
Molly, I know you just teed that up and you described the bill as it's currently written, I believe, but isn't there some discussion about where it should actually land if this Juvenile Justice Commission were to be, if this bill were to pass? There's talk about, does it make sense for it to be under the Criminal Justice Commission? Should it, I mean, YDD actually came up. There's been banter about that. So I just wanted to put that out there before other people hear it. I mean, that's not unusual in legislation. There's typically amendments or ideas that are discussed in the process. So anyway, just thought that was something to share.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. And truly I think that wherever it goes, there as acknowledgement that staffing needs to come with it. It can't just get laid on somebody's plate and said, oh, by the way, Anya can do this. Like, I mean, we have to have the acknowledgement that this is a big lift. And so, and there's some work with Council of State Governments And I think that was also talked about during the hearing. I also testified on behalf of it. I did not represent myself as YDD or YDC at that moment in time. I represented myself strictly as the OJDDA president and from Wasco County. Tori, anything you want to add on that particular one that you would like to share with us?
I don't think so. I think you guys kind of covered it. As you said, legislature, everything's can change. So moving along and seeing where it goes.
Hey, okay. So that is that particular bill. Another bill that is out there that may be of interest as a policy level for this group. And again, I don't know that we have to weigh into it by any means, but at some point in the future, at least having the conversation around it, is House Bill 2327, which has been developed through a coalition, and it really talks about at what age does a youth come into the juvenile justice system, and realistically, some groups have done some research nationwide, and the evidence, developmental model, the developmental approach, kind of all settles on between 12 and 14. And the bill 2327 brings forward the minimum age of 12. Why that is important to us at the YDC and the Juvenile Justice Subcommittee specifically is that population is not currently funded. Our system is not currently funded for that 10 to 12 years old. The kind of the 9 to 12 years, 11-year-old, we kind of have the language, but not the dollars really focused on that population. And so there is a fiscal attached to that bill to really look at adding some dollars to the juvenile crime prevention funding to go out to the counties to support some very specific services to serve the 10 and 11-year-olds who would potentially come under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. Again, I'm going to pause and ask Brian, Christina, Tori, Anya, any of you guys to weigh in for me. You guys cannot believe that I described that one that well. I'm going to ask now, any questions from the committee?
No questions. I like the idea of, funding at an earlier age. I know the fact that I work in trafficking and exploitation, common age of entry is middle and high school. So to start early, I like that idea.
Yeah, yes. And so there'll be several people on from the Juvenile Directors Association, I'm guessing, called to testify on behalf of that. But I just wanted to let you know that there were some dollars that were set aside in our budget to then be able to bolster the services for that population. So thank you, Adrian. Yeah. And when we looked at the data on who that population is, the number is relatively small, but it's significant enough for us to feel like it's an important population to address. Sam, and then Fallon.
Okay, so Molly, if I heard correctly, kids 10 to 12 can be part of juvenile justice system, correct?
Today, as it stands, there is no minimum age for a youth to be brought within the jurisdiction of the juvenile court.
Okay. So, but then for detention, it's my understanding it's 12 to 18 unless, run away from another state or judge gives special permission, right? We're not going to lower the age group where kids can get detained, right? In county detention. We're actually going to
close that door. We're actually going to close that door because you're absolutely right. Right now, and I've held in our detention facility, I've had a 9-year-old and 11-year-olds. And with the judge's special permission from a judge, those youth can be currently held in a detention facility. The minimum age, 23, 27 eliminates that. So they have to be 12 before they can be placed in a detention facility, and a judge cannot override that. Does that answer your question, Sam?
Yes. Okay, yeah, because our data shows sometimes we have second graders, come in. I'm just saying that's what my data shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just don't want the age threshold to be lower. If any, I'm glad that those two exceptions will be eliminated. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Fallon, did you have a question? You're on mute still. Totally okay.
I was wondering what sort of data you looked at to get the determination of who might be in the at risk for entering juvenile detention, for your research on that.
So Christina, can I get my lifeline?
I don't think the data that we pulled. Oh, am I on? Oh, yeah. I was checking to make sure I wasn't on mute. The data that we pulled was related to, we looked at the last 5 years, how many kids that were under the age of 12 had been referred to juvenile departments. And we did do a look at racial and ethnic groups, and it appeared, this was just a first, data pull, but it appeared there was disproportionality related to race. And so Fallon, when you're asking at risk for being in detention, one of the risk factors when we do our juvenile crime prevention risk assessments with kids who become involved with our department is, did they have a referral or engagement or a criminal offense before at the age of 13 or younger. So anybody who starts out that young is really on a trajectory to end up at much, much greater risk of ending up in detention. And typically there's behaviors going on, typically unmet needs for those young people because other systems haven't been able or haven't had the capacity, they say, to serve them. I'm going to try to not do my editorializing. So when it really gets into a situation where there's no place else and these kids end up getting dumped in detention. So I don't know. I'm sorry if that didn't really answer your question, but we didn't specifically drill down about the risk of detention, but just from the work that we do in juvenile departments, we know that the younger kids start out being involved with law enforcement and getting referrals, the greater the likelihood is that they will end up in detention.
And actually, I don't know that the juvenile department directors were the ones that did the research. It's a coalition, and there is a one-page kind of document on it that did the whole research across the nation on all of the information. Christina?
Yeah, I was talking, I'm sorry, I should have qualified that. I was talking about the, we, OJDDA, contacted the Oregon Youth Authority's research department to get information out of the Oregon Juvenile Justice Information System about referrals and some of that demographic information I was talking about in Oregon. But Molly's absolutely correct. The coalition of the various groups that are involved in this, the Oregon Juvenile Department Directors Association is one of the groups that's part of that coalition. There are a lot of different groups involved, but the coalition are the ones who really pulled together the research, many different sources related to why it's bad to treat elementary age children like they're adults, basically, or adolescents when they're not even adolescents most of the time. So anyway, does that help, Fallon?
Yeah, that does help. I was just thinking to myself, like, where would that data even come from? Who collects that sort of research? I mean, I was like just sort of thinking in my head, like, we work with homeless youth exclusively. So like, were they considered, like, how did you break down your data sort of thing? But I don't really need you to go into it. I was just curious from like a working with youth perspective.
Well, there is a, like a, is it a double-sided one pager? I'm trying to remember. I'm having technical difficulties, so I can't use any of my extra screens that I bring things up on. But there is this one pager that we could send to Anya if you wanted to, or Joy, to send out
Yep.
to the YDC folks.
Yeah, I think I'll get that to her because again, it's within the, if there's funding attached to it, it's within our juvenile justice crime prevention plans that those funds need to be articulated. So this committee needs to know what that is. So we'll get that out to everybody. Other questions? Okay. I'm gonna just open it up for anybody else who thinks that there might be legislative action that might either inform or this committee needs to be aware of for our work. Thanks, Sam. And thanks, Sam. I'll catch up with you on that funding meeting that you're going to, because that will be the last one I talk about. And after this, is there anybody else that has funding bills out there or things that our committee may either inform our committee or our committee may need to inform on?
Molly.
Yeah.
So there is a bill, it's a House Bill 2256, and it was brought to our attention by Oregon Youth Authority. Basically what this bill does, it reinstates an older Oregon law that used to allow for younger adults, and the keyword here, adults, who committed crimes after they turned 18, but still under the age of 20, to be placed in Oregon Youth Authority facilities, even though they are Department of Corrections inmates. So that brought us in a non-compliant situation in 2010, in 2011, and 2012, when that law existed. We took multiple steps as a state to make change. Well, first, the Oregon Youth Authority and Department of Correction had a memorandum of understanding that this practice needs to stop. Several people were actually removed from OYA and placed in DOC. And then later on, the law was changed. So now there's an effort to reinstate this practice and put it in Oregon statute. What it would do if it passes, it would create non-compliance issues that we will not be able to resolve, because that would be a sight and sound violation million times multiplied, because every time that would be considered an adult inmate come in contact with youth in Oregon Youth Authority facility, that will create a violation. So it's a concern. We had a conversation with Christine Kirk this morning. She was a little worried that, actually she was super worried that it would affect the youth who are currently in their facilities, who are there as juveniles and so forth. But it's not. It does not have an effect on what is the practice that's happening now. But it might bring back something that we've put a lot of effort into eliminating. Just put it in your radar, and then just the kind of thing that would put us in non-compliance, and there will be no federal funding to talk about, really.
Yeah, I think that, Anya, I agree with what you just said, but I just want to add on to what you said about 2256. I looked that one over for the OJJDP Legislative Committee, and basically in 2019, there was a lot of work done to reform juvenile justice in Oregon and roll back. A massive change was instead of young people 15, 16, and 17 years old defaulting to being prosecuted as adults if they committed serious crimes. The reform work under House Bill 1008 that happened was that changed completely. It went back to the default is young people are in juvenile court There has to be a waiver hearing, specific criteria and evidence has to be presented, and then a judge decides whether a young person stays in the juvenile justice system or is transferred for prosecution to the adult system. So in addition to all the very important problems this particular bill would create in terms of compliance, which are pretty awful, it also rolls back the progressive work that we did to treat adolescents like adolescents in this state. So it's, I'm glad to hear you're riled up about it too. Just wanted to point out, it's like bad on super steroids, in my humble opinion.
Appreciate you saying that.
Yes, it's 2256. And so I think that just goes to one more issue on why it doesn't work, is that we worked really hard to come into compliance with the federal mandate. And this just takes us back so many years and so many frustrations and hair being pulled out. Yeah. Okay, thank you, Anya. Any other that really impact our committee? And there's lots of bills out there, I understand that, but I was just really trying to scope it down to what our committee talks about.
I'll just, I mean, I mentioned it, and well, I don't know if you're going to go there, the truancy bill.
I wasn't going to go there, but so please share with what.
I won't pretend to be an expert. I'll just say I don't. I just know what is out there. SB 48, and we have an internal tracker, and we're tracking that bill as well as others according to what the tracker tells me, which court has put together. It restores penalty for compulsory school attendance violations. So basically there's a fine that this would restore back into law for you know, I think pretty high level truancy. Beyond that, I won't go there, but I think for those who, at the very least, from a compliance standpoint, we know that truancy is a status offense. I mean, there's certainly bigger picture implications of, you know, introducing fines and fees for families around kids missing school, but that's all I'll say, because I'm not an expert, but probably it's just something we are tracking internally and this committee should be aware of.
Okay, perfect. That and if there's anything that comes up, by all means, I think to at least reach out and see where that plays into it. It might come into JCP planning if we hear, because I think several of the JCP plans kind of focus on school success and reduction in truancy, and so I think that is something that at least our partners, our 36 partners and our tribal members focus on, is making sure kids are in school and being successful in school. So thank you. Welcome to BD. We're almost done. That's the best part. It's totally okay. Any other legislation that's out there that pertains to us? Okay. We're at other business, and there's only one thing I would like to add and just kind of put on everybody's little radar screen, is that in 2020, January of 2020, about 45 days before we experienced COVID, we did our first site review for our detention guidelines. And detention guidelines, for Oregon detention guidelines, are a requirement of the Youth Development Division through the Youth Development Council down to the Juvenile Justice Committee. And we need to start thinking about pulling that together again. And I'm a little sorry that Tori jumped off, because Lynn County was our first county detention facility, but we really do need to move that work forward. And I think between all of our work back in 2020, we have a very good tool. And so within the next few months, sooner than later, we will pull that subcommittee back together again and start working on using that tool before we throw everything out, and starting over to meet the other detention facilities and actually do some on-site work in collaboration with Lindsay. So Anya, do you want to kick off on any of that with me?
Well, of course. Well, thank you for bringing it up, and I'm actually terrified that you brought it up. But it's
in my
absolutely
dreams last night.
it needs to be done. Yeah, absolutely. And yes, you're right. It was just before COVID, and that was our first, well, tryout site visit using the tool, and we learned a lot, actually. So yes, I'm absolutely in support of that. Maybe we can have a little conversation, pre-planning how to approach it, because the Juvenile Justice Committee members are welcome to participate, but it's a broader group that we will have to include Department of Corrections and Oregon Youth Authority and Juvenile Department directors and SAM for education. So anyway, it's a lot of work, really. It's important.
Yeah, it's important, and the detention facilities really rely on it. Luckily, we don't have to start from ground zero. The heavy lift, I think, has been done. And now it really is just the implementation. And the really neat thing is that the committee members get an opportunity to participate. And the site visits really are the critical piece, because that gets the opportunity to show off from a detention facilities perspective, the really neat things they're doing, and have the exit interview on what they could be doing better. So it really is kind of a cool process. But that is on our agenda to kick off again. There's a big sigh, Anya. I completely appreciate it.
No. I knew you were gonna bring it up at some point, and I'm just, yes. Yeah. We will do.
Yep, it'll get kicked off and it will be good. I have a question for Brian and Lindsay and Anya and everybody. Are we at any point are we at a point where we could discuss an in-person hybrid meeting? Like are we at a point where we could have a meeting?
The committee?
Yeah.
I leave it to Anya. You.
Well, I think the YDC is meeting in person in March. Is it March 9th, or I forgot the date? So I don't see why the Juvenile Justice Committee wouldn't be able to meet on March 6th in person.
Okay, so if we're meeting together on March 9th, why don't we plan and really target looking forward to our April meeting being an in-person meeting with a hybrid option?
So not in March, but in April. Okay.
How do others feel about that? Perfect. Good.
Great.
Now, I am going to ask for committee members if there's anything else for the good of the order that we need to bring up. And then I'm going to ask our committee members, you're always welcome to raise your hand or to come off mute. Any of our community members that joined us today, thank you for logging in and spending time with us. Are there any questions or anything you would like the committee to take a couple minutes? Is there anything you'd like to share?
Hi, Bo Jessica, Youth 715. Just kind of looking behind the curtain, I guess it's good for background to see kind of how this process works. I don't know that I bring anything to the table of value, but it's just cool to see, how this thing works. And yeah, glad to be here.
Great, thank you.
I really appreciate the lens that you guys are taking for reducing juveniles from entering the system. And I also really love the 2-year model.
Thanks, Fallon. Digna, you came on screen.
Yeah, I don't know what was going on with my computer. It wasn't working, but nothing here. Just wanted to kind of hear more about the next plan for the next year, see if I needed to get ready for that. And other than that, just behind the scene kind of thing, same as Dawn.
So I think the planning process, Anya, it's in our inboxes, isn't it?
Oh, yes, it's in your inbox.
Yeah, we have. Guess ours is cool. So the last kind of plug for data is I really encourage everyone to go and look at our website and the juvenile crime prevention data for the YDC this past year, the report. One thing is why it's beautiful. And also just a moment of we're making an impact, which is awesome. So I looked at our local data and just was astounded. Like if I look, the investment in so not in the JCP numbers, that's one thing, but when I looked at my department numbers, the significant decrease, and our JCP dollars here in Wasco County focus on middle school. And the number of referrals since we implemented our What's Wrong With You program a few years ago to now, the reduction in referrals to the juvenile justice system are beyond staggering. It is phenomenal, the reduction, with just this teeny tiny investment that we put in at the very beginning. So that's just fun. Okay, Brian and Anya, you guys have the last word.
I don't want the last word. I think the words that you just uttered were the best.
Okay.
I just appreciate everybody being here and participating in discussion, and we always welcome guests.
Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe Tabitha, I'll give you the last word since you joined us. Do you have words of wisdom for us to kick off the rest of our week?
I thought we had a good last word. Just keep doing what we're doing. Let's keep doing what we're doing. How about that?
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. See you guys in March on March 6th.
Thanks.